Hello, I'm Doug, and welcome to the Krewe of Japan podcast, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture.
This time on Krewe of Japan podcast.
Welcome back to our podcast. Back in season 1, Nigel, Maddie, Jennifer, and I all reminisced about our experiences with Pokemon, as well as touched on some history. However, a lot of things have changed since the early days of 2021. Like the release of long-awaited open-world video games like Pokemon Arceus and Generation 9's Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the end of the anime series and Ash and Pikachu's journey together, and of course, the reason we're here today, the release of a book called Monster Kids, How Pokemon Taught a Generation to Catch Them All. In part 1 of this 2-part episode, we sit down with Daniel Dockery, the author of Monster Kids, senior writer for Crunchyroll, among many other publications, and most importantly, a Pokemon guru. Together, we explore the evolution of the PokéMania phenomenon that spanned multiple forms of media over multiple decades, including how the anime, video game, and trading card game all played off of one another.
And it's one of the few kind of brands that does this. It has this kind of impeccable synergy where everything sort of serves as an advertisement for another thing.
How the gameplay of Pokemon created a sense of community.
Pokemon with the link cable and trading to get all 150 or 151 meant that a greater emphasis was on playing with each other. And with that kind of mindset, it breeds community. And that by buying the games, you can now become a part of that said community.
And how gameplay evolved over time, further enhancing the Pokemon experience.
Part of me will always prefer like the 2D style, because that's how when I think about how I imagine Pokemon at its most perfect aesthetic, that's how I imagine it. But I do think even still, the ways that they use 3D is getting better, and it's imbuing it with life that I felt like they kind of struggled to capture early on when they made the transition.
Now grab your town map, Pokédex, and Pokéballs. It's time to go out into the world of Pokemon for a nostalgic journey. Let's go. All right, and we are back with our newest episode of the podcast, and today we have a special guest to talk about Pokemon, everyone's favorite thing, Daniel Dockery, who is the senior writer for Crunchyroll and the author of a book called Monster Kids. So, Daniel, welcome to the podcast. Oh, yeah, and we have Jen. Hey, Jen.
Hey.
Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad we have you on because for season 1, we did do an episode on Pokemon, pretty much geeking out all of us about like our love for Pokemon. And I'm usually like the resident geek of the Krewe of Japan podcast, so I'm so glad Doug was like, let's do another Pokemon episode. I love this.
Yeah, I feel like there's like 1,000 layers that one could geek out about Pokemon, whether it's into the current ballyhoo of the franchise or like nostalgically or like very in like a cultural analyzation sense.
Agreed.
There's a lot of, as the book proves, there is a lot of ways to yell, sometimes incoherently, about how great or how intricate Pokemon can be.
I have a copy of your book. I've gotten through about a third of it, so I'm working my way through it, as I've mentioned on plenty of our previous episodes of the podcast. And we're recording this right before Christmas. It's a busy time of year. And
yeah.
With 2 kids, it's hard to find any free time for myself. So I promise, I will finish it. But before we jump into Pokemon more, we always ask our guests when they come on, a question about New Orleans. We're a New Orleans-based podcast. I wanted to ask you if you have a connection to New Orleans in any way, whether it's you've been here before or maybe you haven't, but what is something that reminds you of New Orleans, or what is your fondest memory?
Going back to the before times in 2019, at the very beginning of the year, I want to say it was late January or early February, and my wife and I found, I don't know exactly where it was, but my wife was like, we have there's a pretty nice deal to go to New Orleans for a week. Do you want to? And I was like, yeah, I've never been. So we flew down there, and maybe within like 15 minutes after checking out of the hotel, we were right on Bourbon Street.
All right.
And that's like, obviously we explored a little bit, and we, walked into some like the surrounding more suburban communities. But we spent a lot of time on Bourbon Street. And I really liked it would probably be a different experience if I traveled or done a little bit more exploring, but I really enjoyed it. It was also Super Bowl weekend, so I guess it was February.
Oh, yeah,
so it was so vibrant, and there were, dance parties in the street, and I woke up one morning and I was like, I asked the concierge at the hotel, what time do the bars open? And he goes, what time do you want them to open?
Yeah. They never close.
And yeah, and I went to one of the first bars. It had this kind of like cul-de-sac entrance in it where you just walk in, order a drink, order a shot, and then walk up the door over on this side. And I walked in there, and there was already another guy there, and he goes, Adam. Like I was like, there's no one else in here. He's probably yelling at the bartender, and he points at me and goes, Adam, we lost you. I was like, oh, what happened? Just kind of, because he had that kind of look in his eyes where like either he was like drunk from the night before or like, had been up for a week. But he's like, we lost you. Yeah, it could have been both. Bourbon Street, baby. But he was like, we lost you last night. And I was like, oh, what happened? And he goes, man, and he was like talking about this bar, and he's like, you were there and then you weren't there. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I had to go get some sleep. He was like, oh, Adam, no. Do you want a shot? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so we took a shot of tequila, and he goes, that's my Adam, boy. Keep it going. And then disappeared into the morning. And the bartender, told the bartender, I was like, my name's not Adam. And he goes, does it matter? And I was like, no, I guess not. So yeah, that was one of my main memories, along with like, how beautiful the city is and all the food is and how great all the restaurants we tried was. That kind of loud, forthright friendliness. It really makes me, eventually I want to go back.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a good visit for such a spur of the moment trip.
Yeah. No, it was really fun. There were like we took one of like the ghost tours.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Which was really cool. That was probably one of my favorite parts. We took a ferry over to get breakfast in this little like community near it, and it was just so nice.
Nice. A friend of mine actually does ghost tours, so I'm curious who your tour guide was, and I also don't know if he was doing it at the time. But yeah, that's cool. I'm not gonna lie, I've never been on a ghost tour. Lived here my entire life, never been. I'm ashamed.
No, it's pretty fun. It's it's a pretty decent mix of like the spiritually kind of goofy,
yeah,
and like the really like devastatingly horrific. Whenever they're like, and this is based on a real person. Do you want to know what atrocities they committed? And I'm like, oh, okay, this was the ghost thing was kind of fun, but now he kind of brought the mood down a little bit, but overall it was good. It was, it was really good and really great, helping capture kind of the vibe of this city that at least it might have just been, the way that Bourbon Street bowled me over, but it kind of existed in time and existed completely outside of it. Like like every time I go back to the hotel, I'd be like, what happened? So it was fun.
And I feel like every good New Orleans story has a Bourbon Street story at some point, right? So. Yeah. But yeah, so I don't know how to segue from Bourbon Street to Pokemon.
They're both fun.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I could probably say like, if you play Pokemon Go, they probably have a bunch of Pokestops on Bourbon Street.
I wish I'd had the mindfulness to bring it up. But a lot of looking back on like the kind of fading in and out memories of Bourbon Street. Looking back on, I doubt I'd been able to like be like, oh, I should
spinning
see if I
purple stops. And you're like, why is it giving me Pokeballs?
But yeah, Pokemon and Bourbon Street, they're both very fun. Probably the number one and number two.
What are you catching on Bourbon Street though? We have no idea.
a lot of great drink specials.
Yeah, there you go. So now that we're talking about Pokemon, your book Monster Kids is basically talking about the history of the beginnings of Pokemon and the years that follow. I want to ask you, what was your gateway into Pokemon? Like, at what age did that franchise grab you? And I know you mentioned this a few times in your book, and I don't want you to share too much of your book so that way readers can be surprised. But what grabbed you, and at what age, and like what really sucked you in?
So it grabbed me. It debuted in America in the fall of 1998, and that was when it happened in September of 1998. I remember, and I retell this in the book, and I'll tell the abbreviated version here. I was in a Kmart. That was on the precipice of closure, much like many Kmarts in the United States.
Yeah.
Because you can't stop the Walmart or Target.
Yeah.
So I was in there. It was less Kmart and more like a scene from The Road Warrior. Pure chaos. And I walked past the video games, and I saw on the little collage of Game Boy games behind the glass, there was a sticker, very small, that said, Pokemon, gotta catch 'em all, coming fall 1998. And it had a picture of Pikachu, a picture of Beedrill, and a picture of Blastoise on it. And immediately I was like, those are my guys. And, it enraptured me, and a lot of that is due kind of the fact that everyone I knew would eventually become enraptured in that time frame, because the marketing was a veritable flood. Yeah, and in 4th grade, having been a dinosaur and monster fan for my entire life, it basically checked off all of my boxes. Like, oh, you collect tiny monsters as friends and you travel around a fantasy world that allows you to become deeply, deeply obsessive with every single aspect of it. Sign me up. That's everything I like. So yeah, it was around I think I was in 4th grade. It was either 9 or 10. And it hit me like a truck. Like for a lot of kids who got into it around that time, it was the first franchise or the first fictional thing that I got into on my own accord rather than being introduced to it by my parents. And that made it really special to me. But again, as I talk about in the book, that's kind of all by design.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think back, because I know in the book you mentioned those commercials of like the bus driver driving the Pokemon to the factory.
I was posting on Twitter about this the other day, and because I watch all Game Awards commercials and stuff, and it's all these lavish graphics and really mystic voiceover that is this isn't just a game, this is the next step for art and stuff. And it all looks gorgeous, but then the first Pokemon commercial in America is this Pikachu walks on the bus and is like, Pikachu, and the bus driver goes, yeah, whatever. And then they drive to a garbage dump and they use the car compactor on it, and the monsters are screaming and panicking, and then they close it and it becomes a Game Boy, and they're desperately trying to wriggle out of the Game Boy.
It's kind of morbid, right? If you think back on it.
Yeah. And the bus driver is just playing them rudely. I don't know where he got that bus. I don't know where he if this is all an entire ruse just to capture Pokemon inside of this little square eternal prison of plastic and buttons and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a different time for video game commercials.
Yeah.
As a whole. Go ahead. Sorry, that was a tangent.
No, you're good. No, I'm saying that was I was in 7th grade, I think, when Pokemon came out, but I didn't really get into it until 8th grade. So I just remember seeing the commercials, that one, and then the alleyway where the people had the link cable.
Yeah.
Those are the two I remember, and that's kind of what sticks out in my mind in terms of my first exposure to it.
Yeah, it was that was the second commercial they put out. They put it out I want to say a few weeks after the first one. The first commercial was very much okay, catching them. You play it for a few weeks and you realize that it's a game that it takes two. And which, as the second commercial starts out saying, you can't catch all 150 Pokemon by yourself or something. Yeah. And so it was a very measured, okay, we're going to put the first one out that's about catching them. And then when they get frustrated because they can't catch them, we reveal, hey, do you have a friend with a Game Boy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, looking back at, Generation 1 of Pokemon, where it all began, and not just the video game series, but kind of PokéMania itself. In your opinion, Daniel, what distinguishing trait helped Pokemon just kind of take off? Because I remember being as a child like yourself, around 4th grade and 5th grade, stuff like that. Yeah, 4th grade, because I was trading Pokemon cards in class. I just remember it going nuts, crazy. Everyone was talking about it. I made friends because of Pokemon. What do you feel really made it catch fire?
So there's I think there's a pretty long list of reasons. The first and most cynical answer is marketing. The second answer is that kids like monsters, and when you create a veritable parade of cute monsters that are made to be your friend, that's kind of the thing. Even even Godzilla is a little bit aloof. After he beats up another monster, you can't be like, Godzilla! He just kind of walks into the ocean. But they're your friends, they never leave your side. The third thing is that Pokemon was a lot of kids' first franchise that they became obsessed with, that was introduced to them by them. And so, usually what you play as a child is kind of gatekept by your parents. If your parents don't like Batman, they're not going to take you to see the latest Batman movie. but they had no frame of reference for what Pokemon is, so immediately you have a new generation of children who are the experts in this subject that no other older people really have a frame of reference for. And so there's a feeling of power in that. There's a feeling of specialness in that. Combine that with the specialness of being able to create your own team and personalize your Pokemon experience a lot. It's a little bit magical. And also, one thing that Pokemon did is they kind of democratized the collecting experience, especially because collecting now requires so much like means, like you have the space to store it and like the way to figure out like, you know, where the best stuff is and the money to collect it. But Pokemon essentially was like, hey, if you have a Game Boy and you have a cartridge and you have a friend with a link cable, you can have the best collection in the world. You know, you are now the number one collector of this. You're the number one trainer. And it was, you know, all of that combines really makes for a singular, unique, empowering experience for fans. And when you're in franchise being introduced to, you know, an entirely new region of the world, that's really all you can ask for.
Yeah, and the other thing they had going for it really was that it wasn't just a video game, right? It was a video game, yes. Yep. But there were other branches of the franchise that kind of invaded at the same time. You know, you had your video game, but then you also had the anime, and then you had the live action not the live action musical. You had the trading card game, right? Yeah, the live action musical. I looked that up on YouTube the other day, and it was just wow.
It's wild.
Yeah, but you had those three. You had the big three. Jen mentioned trading cards and making friends and doing that in class. I remember, man, in high school, because that's junior high school, when I got into the trading card stuff. And I know that there was like trading cards that we would sell and buy on the bus, or like people would steal them. It was like, you know, the bus was like kind of your dealer's corner kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
Of those three, which do you think benefited the most from the other two in terms of driving the popularity of Pokemon, both in Japan but also in the US?
I think the one that was a primary driver, because we talk a lot about the Pokemon trading cards a lot, and the trading cards are like became kind of their whole entire other thing culturally. Like the trading cards were being like, you know, the video games and anime, you know, got their fair share of criticism, but the trading cards were like accused of being like a social ill among children. Like it was like if you go back and read articles, it's treated like a cultural plague among, like, you know, you'll talk like the prisoners were like, we don't know how to stop it.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that kind of drove it is the fact that the anime came out about 2.5 weeks before the video games released in September 98, and the anime caught on immediately.
Yeah.
And in a way, Pokemon, and it's one of the few kind of brands that does this, it has this kind of impeccable synergy where everything sort of serves as an advertisement for another thing. But having this anime with this kid named Ash Ketchum and Pikachu, and they're immediately introduces the mascot, and the anime does a pretty good job of laying out all of like the required ethos of Pokemon and Pokemon training and whatever. I think it was, you know, I'd probably say that the anime, by merit of being introduced first, but also because it kind of laid out everything that it means to get into Pokemon, both as like a fictional world and as a franchise with a bunch of different working pillars in it. I'd probably say that, to be honest. I mean, the games are fun. The trading cards took on a life of their own, but the anime, especially when it started out, was really, really formative for a lot of people. It really helped you frame kind of your opinion of what you expected Pokemon to be.
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah, because I just remember, you know, as a kid, you're already watching cartoons on TV. Yeah. So having Pokemon just like pop up on the schedule of your regular cartoons, it was an easy grab, like attention grabber. And so, yeah, I feel like back then, I think I agree with you, Daniel, that probably the anime did boost the video game and then hence boost the trading card game. But I feel nowadays, especially recently, it's different. It's the video games now boost the anime.
Yeah.
Because now we have like this new video game that came out, you know, Scarlet and Violet. And then they just recently announced, oh, okay, now we're doing this new anime. And they wouldn't have been able to announce that without the video game.
No, it's a like any kind of massive thing of this, you know, Goliath entertainment conglomerate. It evolves and different stuff gets popular at different rates. Stuff goes to the wayside. Stuff transforms in ways that you wouldn't have expected. But yeah, the video games kind of became like the video games have always been like the Pokemon source, but they're the Pokemon Bible. The video games are the sun in the galaxy of Pokemon. Everything revolves around it. The choices that they make and what they do. We could talk all day about like what kind of leads to that, but just through sheer kind of consistency and a constant sort of self-reinvention where every video game makes such a concentrated effort to attract a new generation of fans, it's easy to see now in retrospect why it's now at the forefront and is kind of this huge head of the entire thing.
See, I would love to see an anime for Pokemon Arceus. I think that would be really dope.
I mean, they technically have that on YouTube.
Do they?
Yeah.
No, see, I'm not as connected. I played the game a little bit.
Bruh, you are a fake fan of Pokemon. I'm the real fan.
Don't you dare gatekeep on me.
I'm the real fan. This is my episode. I'm taking over, Doug.
Okay. No, just to kind of piggyback on what you guys are talking about, I agree that the anime is definitely, in the beginning, was the driver. It gave personality to a lot of the Pokemon that you... Yeah. In the game, you don't really have personality, right? You just see them jiggle on the screen and do an attack, and that's it. But the show gives you the Meowths, they give you the Charmanders or the Squirtle Squad, and all those different things that makes you want to go get those Pokemon that you can't get a Squirtle and a Bulbasaur and a Charmander in the same game in the beginning, right? You have to have either 3 games or save, trade, and do that kind of thing, which I definitely had to do with my brother. But yeah, so like it gave those things, it drove the desire to do that. Because I know for me, I think I watched the anime first, and then I didn't play the game right away, but I watched the anime and then I started doing the trading card game, I think. Yeah. But I think that was the order for me. And then eventually the game I got at Christmas, I borrowed my cousin's game that I couldn't save, so I had to leave my Game Boy charging in the wall and would just play overnight for hours at a time. But yeah, that was the order for me. But I do agree that the anime was the driver, and now, like you said, the games are the ones that do that.
Yeah, the games are driving it. But shifting over, to the evolution of the video games themselves, it definitely, like we said, played a part of people like the concept of collecting, which is the whole purpose of the series itself. And, a big part of that collecting, like we said, is the trading concept, being like the trading cable or like linking for battles because you could battle like your friends, which was awesome. So, do you think Pokemon would have been as successful if it didn't have that concept of like playing with friends through a link cable and trading and battling? And like, I remember mine. Like, do you remember your first Pokemon that you traded for?
I think a lot of times when we think about playing video games with people, and those obviously you could battle with it, but a lot of times when we think about playing video games, we think about playing against one another. But Pokemon with the link cable and trading to get all 150 or 151 meant that a greater emphasis was on playing with each other. And with that kind of mindset, it breeds community. And that by buying the games, you can now become a part of that said community. Whether you end up trading or not, there is an inherent feeling of, hey, we're all kind of a part of this big Pokemon fandom. And by getting the games and having the option to, I've joined in on the zeitgeist. And that's really, really cool. That's a pretty prime impetus to, dip your toes into something. What was the second question?
Do you remember your first Pokemon that you traded?
Oh, my first trade.
Yeah.
My first Pokemon that I traded, so I was playing Pokemon Red, which I had a Charmander on, and then I had Pokemon Blue, which I had chosen Squirtle on, and I did not have a Bulbasaur, and this was before Pokemon Yellow came out, and you could collect the first 3 anime style.
Yeah.
So I got a friend's Bulbasaur. What did I trade? I want to say I traded like an Onyx for it. I don't think it was a very fair trade.
No, indeed not.
I might have did a little wheeling and dealing.
Of course you did, like every good kid that day.
Yeah.
That time.
You don't get it. Onyx is really good. Brock has an Onyx.
Oh yeah.
And this poor kid, yeah. Right. And this poor kid was like, "Oh gosh, really?"
Oh no.
So
grew up dope.
Yeah, I got him. But yeah, I think that was it. I think I traded. I don't know if it was Onyx. Maybe it was like Geodude or something.
Oh, that's even worse.
I really sold.
You must have.
And the trick is that, once he gets a Graveler, I mean, he's got to trade it back to you. Right?
He's got a great trade big column. And by that point, I was already like, deal's done. Deal's over. We can't, no takebacks. Should have read the contract.
Dude evolves, though.
Yeah. No, it
Unlike
was
Onyx in the beginning.
Yeah, it was such a, I think that was my first one. It's a little bit predatory, but I got
you do what you gotta do.
Yeah, you do what you gotta do. It's Pokemon.
Yeah. Speaking of the evolution of Onyx, I mean, that came in, wasn't it Generation 2, right?
Gen 2.
Yeah, Gen 2. And Gen 2 was a massive breath of fresh air for the franchise as a whole because it really built upon the foundation that Generation 1 brought. And the great thing about that, in my opinion, because that's really I think I really loved the first generation, but Gen 2 is where it really like gripped me and wouldn't let go. Because one, it was on Game Boy Color, and so it was much more vibrant, being with gold and silver. But the one thing that they really did was they built upon the story from Generation 1. And I don't think there's many versions of this game outside of maybe Black and White that have really kind of built on the previous, storyline. And they didn't have, and I think this is the only game that has dual regions, right? I don't think any other ones, it's just, do they? And maybe I'm having a brain fart here. But they had Johto and Kanto as like your two regions, right? In Generation 2, but I don't think any other ones did that. Some of them had like an extra kind of like playable area that you can get to once you complete the game, like the 7 islands. What was it?
And Leaf Green and Fire Red, they had like islands, extra stuff, but pretty much Gen 2 is the only one.
Right. Yeah. And why do you think no other games did that? Was it just such a lift to recreate or add on a whole extra world, a region, and storyline on top of what you already put into it? And now the games have grown so much that you just can't do it feasibly.
I imagine the main reason is probably a space issue.
Yeah.
By the time you have, Kanto, the entirety of Kanto on there, even at like some of its abridged parts, that Game Boy card is about to bust.
Yeah.
So I imagine it's probably a space thing. And I don't have a problem with that, but it does kind of make it special because you get to go back essentially to your hometown if you played Red and Blue.
Yeah.
You get to go revisit Palette, and then you get to fight Red on top of Mount Silver at the very end. And that's a really cool feeling, and it kind of brings the story to a conclusion. And what better way to show that you've not only improved at Pokemon, but improved your spiritual bond with Pokemon than by, besting your previous level of achievement.
Former self.
Yeah.
What was your favorite aspect of Generation 2? What part did you like the most about it?
Probably the cell phone. I had a cell phone in the Pokemon games before I ever had a cell phone in real life.
Really?
Yeah.
Out of all the aspects, you choose that?
No, I thought it was super, super cool. You get the Pokegear from your mom at the very beginning. Yeah, I thought that was the neatest thing, is just the fact that call up a pal, be like, hey buddy, how's your Rattata doing? Great. All right. Talk to you later. Maybe I'll see you around.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that was their favorite aspect of Gen 2.
I think that was probably my favorite one. Yeah, nice. I wouldn't get a phone until a few years, probably 3 years after I played Pokemon Gold and Silver. But yeah, I think that was probably it. Just the whole Pokegear as a whole. You had a little radio.
Yeah.
And you had I think that was really cool to me. That really struck me.
Was it that game, or was it another one? Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but where you can call them and sometimes they're like, hey, you want to battle? And then you can go back and battle them. Reintroduced.
That was it, yeah.
That was it, okay. It reintroduced replayability, right? You could keep playing the game. It's not just, okay, you battle this one person once and it's over. Yeah. You could go and fight again.
You see all their stories kind of unfolding, and there's also the days of the week of Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Yeah. And the time of days and stuff. And also the fact that if you become friends with people, they'll be like, hey, if I see this Pokemon, I'll let you know. Or if I get this item, I'll let you know. And they'll give you a call on a certain day of the week or at a certain time. And they'll be like, hey, get over here. There's a bunch of Yanma or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool. And it makes the Pokemon world kind of feel like a place you just kind of hang out in, rather than a video game that you need to beat and then be done with.
Yeah. I think also the one thing that really struck me, because I remember my little brother's friend got it, and he got it before I did. So his friend came over, he brought it over,
I was like, hey, can I just look at it and see what it looks like? You know, to see the gameplay. And like my first encounter, I'm not lying. My first encounter in the wild was Entei.
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, whoa, oh wow, you run into this dude? Like, and my little brother's friend was like, holy crap, what is that? Oh my god, I'd never seen that before. It was just like and then I'm like, wait, this isn't normal? And he's like, no, I've never seen that before. And so I was like, oh. And then I realized how actually rare it is to run into those after the fact. And I was like, oh wow.
Did y'all catch it?
No, he fled. No, not that. Like, I think it was like the first time says like full life bar and everything. That was I thought that was pretty cool too. Like that added that you have to really chase these guys around and really work for it. Oh, it was frustrating, but
no, it's very fun. Again, it gives you the meaning to keep playing the game rather than everything serving as kind of a checklist before the credits.
Right, right.
And with each release of a new generation of games, you have a new generation of graphics. And for me personally, honestly, Gen 3 was my favorite because the graphics just went from one spectrum to the other side for me. And that just blew my mind as a kid. So Gen 3 is my favorite. Just wanted to put that out there. But, with the systems continuing on, bringing like new graphics, new potential to the games, and improving the visuals. But Gen 5, Black and White, began with the departure of like 2D to 3D, with Gen 6, X and Y being the first generation entirely in 3D. How was the overall reception towards the transition, you think? And how did you in particular feel about the change?
I think they're getting a little bit better with it now, especially with, like Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet. I think for a while, the full 3D games kind of bothered me because they lost a lot of personality, mainly in how the Pokemon sprites. Yeah. They're just kind of like these 3D blobs that just kind of like sit there or just bounce around a little bit. Whereas, especially in like the Gens 1 and 2 and 3, they moved around starting in Crystal. Like they made a little movement as soon as you saw them, but they were also doing stuff. They were also in like action poses. Like there's a lot of Gen 1 sprites that are like midway toward attacking you, which I thought was kind of cool. So I thought early 3D games kind of had a problem with like vibrancy, where they didn't feel alive as much as they kind of felt like, again, just 3D stock models. But again, it's gotten better over time, I think, because in the grand scheme of like Pokemon fandom, I'm like roughly 1,000 years old. Part of me will always prefer like the 2D style, because that's how when I think about how I imagine Pokemon at its most perfect aesthetic, that's how I imagine it. But I do think even still, the ways that they use 3D is getting better, and it's imbuing it with life that I felt like they kind of struggled to capture early on when they made the transition.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you in terms of like my perfect aesthetic is the bird's eye 2D view of like the character kind of walking through the tall grass and everything. Yeah. I did struggle a little bit with I think it was Black and White, or was it X and Y? I can't remember. That's kind of when they got to the point in my life where I was like traveling a lot and not able to play them to fruition as much as you grow up, right? It gets harder, and I couldn't juggle being a Pokemon master and mastering my own life. But yeah, I struggled with this, how it looked. It just felt different for me. Yeah. From a departure from those like Gens 1 through 3 for me. So I do like how it looks now, though. Glitches aside from Scarlet and Violet, right? The funny things, although that's a different story for a different day, or maybe later. But I think like with Arceus, I like you can run around and see the Pokemon like kind of popping up in the grass. You couldn't do that in the old versions of the game, right? But I think that's like really cool. The other thing too, in addition to the graphics, they had more functionality that came with the actual console. You went from Game Boy, regular Game Boy, to Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, DS, 3DS, now Switch. But along the way, you were introduced to Wi-Fi capabilities, which basically was like your link cable on steroids. It really, that was a way to connect everybody to the world, not just immediate vicinity, but the world. Especially in Gen 6, I think my favorite feature in Gen 6 was like Wonder Trading, where it introduced like, you could just throw whatever out into the ether and you get something back.
It's just kind of like, it sometimes felt, entirely by luck. You just kind of like put your fishing pole out there and like, oh, let me get something good today. Yeah.
I would catch millions, maybe not millions, but I would catch so many Rattata and Pidgey and just toss those out there. I'm like, sorry, dude, whoever's getting this, my apologies. And I'd be getting back like Japanese Venusaurs and Spanish, like, I don't know, whatever, something really cool. And, you know, I thought that was like something that was really interesting. And Wi-Fi really changed the game for Pokemon. It really did.
Yeah.
So which part of any game in any generation was impacted the most by Wi-Fi functionality, and which was your personal favorite?
I think trading was definitely the thing that was probably impacted the most, like you just said. Taking it from kind of like this link cable process to being like, now you can trade with anyone in the entire world. But I'm going to go a little bit off the thing and say that my favorite thing about Wi-Fi or internet functionality is the fact that it's not in the games, but like now that internet is has evolved from being, you know, kind of dial up on your parents' computer in like the office to the fact that you have internet on every single device known to man, means that like there's a constant conversation about Pokemon going on no matter like where you look. And obviously sometimes the conversations are not the best ones, but it creates a kind of vibrancy that even during and I guess like the Wonder Trading does too, because, you know, for a long time, especially, you know, after the Game Boy generation kind of died out, and that's sort of my book, Monster Kids, kind of wraps up. Basically, a lot of people thought that Pokemon was over, that the trend had finally gone. But all of a sudden, you get the chance of Wonder Trade to like trade with anyone in the world, and it's happening so quickly, and it's happening all the time that, you know, it's anything but, you know. Pokemon, just because it wasn't like the cultural, you know, behemoth of, like, just because PokéMania was over didn't mean that Pokemon had like died in any way. It just, you know, it just had become assimilated into kind of this worldly cultural consciousness. And yeah, I think, that was probably the biggest thing for me, is the fact that, you know, whether it was, you know, everyone having access to the internet and thus being able to talk about Pokemon whenever they wanted, or stuff like the Wonder Trade, is that now you really get a sense of the fact that even when like sales for the games dropped, that Pokemon never really died. It never really went extinct. It was always there, and there was always a very passionate, huge fan base for it. It just took a little while to kind of evolve to its next form.
Yeah,
agreed. Yeah, because I mean, my parents sold all my Pokemon stuff when I was a child, because they were like, oh, you're gonna grow up and grow out of it. Look at me today, still liking Pokemon.
You were checking Pokemon Go earlier before this call started. I know.
Was.
Do you remember, like, I forget with this Game Boy Advance or DS, which one had like the microphone? Which was the first device that had like a microphone built in? You could initiate a trade with a friend, you had a friend code, and then you can actually talk to the person, right?
I know the DS had a microphone on it. I do not remember which one. I have no idea. I know that but I know the DS had a microphone. I did Wonder Trading, but I did not do any trading while it was on the regular DS.
Okay.
For some reason, yeah.
I think there was one, maybe, I don't know which gen, but I remember distinctly you had to get like a friend code, you had to get a link code or whatever to connect with like a person, and then you can start a trade session or whatever, and while you were in the session you could actually like talk, like it was like a phone, like talking to your DS, and then it would play the sound out on their end and vice versa. And I always thought that was kind of cool, because back then, you know, I had some friends that I had met, you know, online that I didn't really talk to, didn't have their phone numbers, but that was a way we can talk, so it was pretty cool. So we'd start a trade session and just chit chat for like 20 minutes and not actually do a trade.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one thing that Pokemon is now seems very famous for, and since recent years, is, you know, good old remakes of just older games. You know, the first one being, you know, like we said previously, Leaf Green and Fire Red, which, you know, really took the Gen 3 graphics and brought it back to our Gen 1 that we know and love. And, you know, it even you know, did it to Gen 2 with Soul Silver, and then it did it to Gen 3, and most recently Gen 4, which, oh my god, it needed it. Do you think that remakes, you know, with updated graphics and mechanics, it's important to the, you know, Pokemon franchise? And, you know, or do you just see it as like a nostalgic, you know, money grab for the company?
I mean, I believe it definitely can be a nostalgic money grab. I think there's a reason why like people often refer to like Heart Gold and Soul Silver as some of the best games in the franchise, because I think they're the kind of the romantic ideal of what I imagine a remake should do, is that it takes a look at the original thing and says, okay, how can we improve this experience for the player? Not just creating better graphics, not just adding more stuff. How do we make this an experience that stands on its own while also grabbing people who think they've already played this before? And I think Heart Gold and Soul Silver really does that, because all of a sudden Johto, which at this point is a classic, or at the point of, now and at the point of Heart Gold and Soul Silver's release was like a classic region. Johto feels more, vibrant and dynamic than ever. They really paid attention not just to like adding stuff and making it feel really tuned up, but like stuff as simple as like making navigating the world a little bit more fun. Making, like all these little details of like as something as simple as like where to put stairs and like that kind of thing. And that goes a long way in making you feel like, oh, this was worth it. When in actuality, you could have just dug your gold and silver cartridge out of the attic and not spent the $40.
Yeah.
Or $60 now. Or considering how much Heart Gold and Soul Silver go for on like Facebook Marketplace, $1,000.
Really?
Yes, I mean, they can get pretty pricey, especially if you have like the original boxes.
Yeah, if you want them in box.
I do back here somewhere.
Oh, wow. Jen.
Gamer husband. But yeah, no, it can get pretty pricey for those. Those are gems.
I got my gold cartridge up here somewhere. I don't know where it is, but it's in my closet.
My games are back there on the bookshelf that now in the camera looks like it's about to topple over, but I swear it's it looks like the leaning tower.
Front loaded with all these video games, huh?
I know. There's too much Pokemon.
There's never too much Pokemon.
No, there's never too much. But yeah, I think that's what it needs, is that it got to give us, it can't just give us an updated thing. It's got to there's a deeper mission for the games, that it has to have a reason to be. It has to have a reason to exist on its own. Like if I did not have any attachment to any of the previous games or any expectations for it, would I still want to play? Would I still want to play this game? Okay. And I think the best Pokemon remakes answer that question with yes, and the worst Pokemon remakes answer that question with, but please play. You liked this.
Yeah, that's kind of true. I agree. Yeah, I feel your vibe.
Do you know like why they don't re-release? I mean, in your personal opinion, I'm sure you don't have insider knowledge of this, but why they just don't re-release the original games on like a ROM type thing on the Switch?
They re-released a lot of the Game Boy games, Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, Crystal, and like Pokemon Trading Card game. I don't know if they ever did Pinball for the Game Boy. Maybe they did.
I don't think they re-released Pinball, but they did re-release one of my favorites, which is Pokemon Puzzle for the Game Boy Color. That was awesome. Yeah, and they did that for the Switch.
I did on the 3DS eShop.
Yeah, and they did that too.
Really cool. That was really cool. That was good. And for a second, you could play Generation 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, all on the 3DS, which is great. A great one-stop shop for experiencing the entire kind of history of Pokemon games. I don't know why. I have no information as to why they wouldn't, just be like, hey, by the way, all these older games are now on the Switch for $10 or $20 or whatever, because people would pay for them. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how much longevity they get out of them, considering that they're also constantly releasing new games at this point.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be a worthwhile investment. But
I mean,
I'm not Nintendo. Yeah.
Just to relive like the old games, and
yeah.
I don't know how often you guys go back and play the old games, but it's like when you go from Arceus or I haven't played Scarlet Violet yet, but soon, from the newer games and then go back to the original, you're like, oh man, graphics, not that they're bad, but it's like the mechanics of the game, you're like, I can't run. I can't speed through things.
That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
The conveniences are gone.
Yeah.
They give you the biggest thing is the until you get like a bicycle, you're just walking.
You only get one TM. One version of TM ever to use. You better pick your Pokemon for
HM, if you teach it that, they can't let them learn it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Flash. Ugh.
Cut forever.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning into the Krewe Japan podcast. What a trip down memory lane that was, revisiting the early days of PokéMania with our special guest, Daniel Dockery. As we mentioned at the beginning of the episode and throughout part 1 of our conversation with Daniel, he is the author of the book Monster Kids: How Pokemon Taught a Generation to Catch Them All. The book goes way more in depth into the early days of Pokemon and how it came to be the behemoth that it is. Come back for part 2 of our conversation with Daniel, where we discuss the more recent years, including Pokemon spin-offs, Pokemon Go, the newest generation, and what's to come in the future. And lastly, if you are listening to this on the day that this episode releases on April 7th, join us in wishing Daniel a very happy birthday. We'll have his social media linked in the show notes. What are your fondest memories of the early years of Pokemon? Which generation was your favorite gen? Share with us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok at Krewe of Japan Podcast. That's KREWEOFJAPANPODCAST, Krewe of Japan Podcast. While you're there, give us a follow, like, retweet, share, whatever you want to do. We're there for you. Let us know how you're enjoying the podcast. Or maybe you'd like to leave your feedback in a more private setting. Send us an email at kreweofjapanpodcast@gmail.com. I'll spell that one more time. KREWEOFJAPANPODCAST@gmail.com. And speaking of feedback, you probably heard this already a bunch of times, so I'm going to say it again. If you're enjoying what you're listening to today, or so far in Season 4, or our previous seasons, please feel free to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast streaming app. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. Don't forget to come back for part 2 of our conversation with Daniel Dockery, discussing the evolution of PokéMania. But that's it for today. Until next time.